What's good, y'all? Black Cartel is in the building. I'm the CEO, KingPen Capone. Before we go any further, man, you gotta like, you gotta share, you gotta subscribe, and that icon thing over there that look like a bell, hit that, man, so you'll be notified when Black Cartel drop that hot content. Yo, Maestro, one time.
This is Black Cartel, bitch. So why would you trip on them trees that we smoking? 06 is the sit. Black attire be my threads. Straight ball fade, no dreads. Fuck the police, cause on my payroll it's the motherfucking feds. My niggas is like troopers, they got mad skills for real, born with text in hand. Similar to Navy SEAL scopes, infrared text, and bulletproof vests. Sometimes I feel like I'm Superman without the S on my chest.
What's good, y'all, man? Black Cartel is in the building as well as KingPen Capone, man. I'm in the house, y'all. And today I'm going to be reading, narrating Mistaken Identity, Volume 1, The Hitman. Yes. And as you already know, I'm going to give you a little backdrop on this book. What was my inspiration and motivation behind me writing the book? And it goes as follows. So, in the county, I wrote a book. At the time, it was called Mistaken Identity. To be honest with you, I didn't know it was going to be called that, but I wound up calling it that later on down the line. But yeah, it was Mistaken Identity, and right now that book is Volume 3, The Connect. So I wrote like 80% of this book. Now, when you're in the county and you have to go to prison, like the transition, first and foremost, you have to go to Lorraine. You're not even really going to the prison that you're supposed to go to. You're going to a reception prison. And that's a spot that you go to where they figure out where you're going to go. You feel me? So if you have property, if someone doesn't come and pick it up, they consider it trash and then they throw it away. My book was part of that. You feel me? So I called a loved one to come and pick it up. And they wound up coming to pick it up. Later on down the line, they lost it, man. I'm sick with it. I wish I had that book to this day. I don't know where it's at. I'm sorry, but that's neither here nor there. So in any case, she came and picked it up, and then I get to Lorraine. So when I get to Lorraine, she's the only one on my visiting pass. So when I get to Lorraine, I'm like, send it back. And she's scared to send it back because she's scared that they're going to terminate her because of the content of what's in the book. Man, some crazy stuff like that. So after arguing to no avail, I never got the book back. Now, this is at the very, very beginning. I was roommating or bunky, celly, whatever the fuck you want to call him, with a guy named Highway. And we were talking about everything under the sun, man. Everything, and then it wound up going in the book, movies, and then it wound up going in the books, and then I told him I wrote a book. So I spit the whole book to him, and he was like, man, you gotta write another book, you gotta write another book. So he like really, I'm not gonna say he inspired me to do it because I was gonna do it, I just wasn't gonna do it as soon, you feel what I'm saying? Like he really pushed me and like really had me pumped, so. And he even asked to be in the book, so that character Highway in this book is him. That was a shout out to him, you feel me? So. Wherever you at, Highway, one love, dog. So yeah, Highway was like, you have to write a book. And this was the book right here. I'm like, okay, you know what I'm saying? I get to jotting it down, boom, 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 show them a chapter, let my people see it. It wound up being fire. Like after this old school dude read it, like he's an old school dude and he was about the wordplay, you feel me? After he read it, I just knew Finesse and Polish was gonna be that thing, but I'm not gonna hold you up. I ain't gonna talk your ears off. You feel me? I'm gonna let you judge for yourself. My name's KingPen Capone. I'm the author and narrator of Mistaken Identity, Volume 1, The Hitman. Enjoy.
Black Cartel presents Mistaken Identity, Volume 1, The Hitman. Written and narrated by KingPen Capone. Chapter 1. The year was 1978 in Cleveland, Ohio. It was late February, yet the streets were clear of snow and slush. Last night, freezing sheets of rain saturated the urban landscape known as the land, and today a blistering wind came off the lake. This created invisible slick spots throughout the city. The temperature was 10 degrees, but the wind made it feel like it was 20 below zero, causing it to feel like razor blades to the skin. Frederick Patterson, known in the streets as FP, was leaving a female companion's house. It was 3:15 in the morning. He was, at the time, considered one of the biggest drug dealers Cleveland had ever produced. During his reign on the streets, he was moving 50 to 100 kilos in cocaine and heroin a week. That's not including the pounds of weed that passed through the trap that he was responsible for. Like many greats that preceded him, FP had plans on leaving the game for good. There were two things holding him back. One was his last 47 kilos. The second was a person that planted the seed of getting out the game within him that grew at an alarming rate. It grew into a weed that was literally pushing FP out the game. It was a plague, an epidemic if you will. It was his brother. Tony Patterson was a younger version of FP as far as looks were concerned. He had long flowing hair that laid on his shoulders. When it came to getting money, Tony was ambitious yet cold-hearted and utterly ruthless. This once led him to beat a man to death with a golf club over $100. FP knew that Tony's pursuit for money would be the downfall of their organization. This was the first and main reason why he wanted to leave the game. Money made Tony's world go round. He didn't care for women too much unless they were giving him oral pleasure. The only thing he actually had feelings for was his brother FP, his best friend Angel, and his younger sister Vernice. Tony's actions perplexed a great deal of people because of his older brother's morals and values. FP was very laid back. He treated everyone with the utmost respect. It didn't matter if you were white or black, a junkie or a drug dealer that supplied the junkie. They all got treated the same, with respect. Angel Flemings, FP's best friend, was different from FP and Tony. He was an extremely quiet person, the type that wouldn't speak unless spoken to. He was a short but stout man who stood at 5'7" and carried 210 pounds. His hair was just as long as Tony's. The reason being was because he was mixed. This made him different and a target. Coming up back then, he had to fight almost every day. People in his neighborhood didn't accept his mother and father's interracial marriage. All that changed when he met FP and Tony. Angel loved them and was always there for them through good and bad times. FP knew how much love he had for them, so it wasn't a problem having Angel around when he reached top-notch status. It was to the point that if you saw FP or Tony, then you knew Angel was close by. Angel carried a .38 snub nose that he rarely used. He caught his hands as pistols, and he kept them locked, cocked, and ready to gun down anyone that came in the way of Tony, FP, or himself. A horrible drug deal was a direct result behind Angel and Tony's death. It was a drug deal that should have never taken place due to FP's golden rule of never stepping outside the circle of business. Angel was against the drug deal at first, but decided to go along with Tony to ensure the safety of his good friend. Now, Tony would normally let FP handle the business aspect of things and just transport the product. He wanted to make the drug deal happen to show FP that he was capable as well as responsible to handle the business aspect of the organization. Also that he was capable of making responsible moves on his own. His way of thinking was once he see how I conduct business on my own and still turn a dollar, then he won't leave. Of course, neither he nor anyone else knew that he made a deal with the Sampsons. These were three brothers that moved to Cleveland from Cincinnati in what they called Little Sin at the time. Damiano, Sammy, and Serge called themselves Falling Angels. At 23, Damiano was the elder of the three, as well as the brains and the artist of sorts of the outfit. His 6'1" height stood at 196 pounds of raw attitude. Brown skin with short hair, he fancied himself a ladies' man. When they weren't robbing the hustler for his hard-earned, you can catch him at the club putting his Mac down on a woman. Sammy, at 22, followed every move that his brother Damiano made. He too was slim built, but 20 pounds lighter than his older brother. Like Damiano, he was brown skinned with long hair. Sammy's vice wasn't women. His addiction was the deadly drug known as heroin. Unlike Damiano, splurging on women with the money he got from stick-ups, Sammy used his paper to support his habit. Serge, on the other hand, was a live wire. He had a lot of attitude like his brother Damiano. Serge was always fighting and provoking the majority he was in. He cared about having money like his brothers, but the one thing that turned him on was drama. He loved it by the boatloads. There were many that were fooled by his short but chubby frame. Serge would always start something with someone that was twice his size. They were only fooled thinking they would have an easy victory against the mentally unstable Serge. That was until he unleashed his wrath. He was what you called a true Tasmanian devil. Hands down, these three had to be the biggest cutthroats that came out of Cincinnati. Case in point, they had to move from Cincinnati just to get away from all the drama they brought down on themselves. FP came home from his much-needed vacation and went straight to his stash to check his illegal treasure. After doing a quick count of his money, he went to the kilos of cocaine and heroin. He instantly realized that 3 kilos of cocaine were missing. First thing he did was walk over to his phone to call his brother. At that precise moment, the telephone rang. It was the county coroner telling him about the deaths of his brother and his best friend. They also wanted him to come down to the city morgue and view the bodies in hopes to shed some light for the detectives who were investigating the case. FP went down and viewed the bodies and saw an image he would soon never forget. Tony and Angel laying dead on a slab, eyes closed, physical trapped in an eternal slumber. The both of them had pictures of angels with clipped wings carved from their collarbone down to their waist. Along with it were the words, "Falling Angels." The light turned green and someone from behind him blew the horn, breaking him out of his flashback. FP threw up his hands as if to say okay and proceeded through the light. At the time, he was 28 years old. He stood at 6'1", walking around with 180 pounds. He was brown-skinned with a slender build. His hair was medium length and he chose to wear it in the finger wave style. It was nothing to catch him coming out the hair salon every 3 to 4 days. It was mandatory that he had to have that fresh out the shop look at all times. FP was a man that took pride in his appearance, and it showed in his tailor-made suits. He wore enough diamonds that if you took them and pawned them, you would have enough money to buy a few homes. The car that he was in, out of the many he owned, was a 1975 Cadillac Eldorado. It had about 7 coats of gloss on it that made the automobile shine like black marble. Even in the winter, his cars looked immaculate. FP was on St. Clair headed east when he came to a red light on East 55th. Checking his rearview mirror, he noticed a navy blue late model work van. At first glance, he didn't pay too much attention to it. After the light change, he rode to 79th. FP noticed the work van was still there. Now he had to pay attention. When the light changed, he tried to switch lanes, slowing down by letting the van by. The van would just follow every move the caddy made. FP reached up under his seat and poured out 2 357 Magnums and sat them on his lap. At this point, the van moved alongside of the L-Dog. FP looked over at the van to get a look at his tailgaters. Because the vehicle sat so high, he really couldn't see. The van rode alongside of the caddy for about 2 more blocks, then sped off. "Dumb motherfuckers," FP said under his breath as he watched the taillights disappear in front of him. FP looked down at the gas needle and noticed that he was running low and didn't have enough fuel to make the trip home. He went to a Texaco gas station on 105 in St. Clair. He pulled in, shut the engine off, and sat there for a brief moment. He checked the rounds in both pistols, then put them in the pockets of his coat. He had a very uneasy feeling. FP went inside to pay and was back out at his car pumping gas. 3 guys came running from behind the station. All 3 of them had on clown masks and were dressed down in black. FP was thinking about the van that was following him, and he began to get that uneasy feeling again. This caused him to check his surroundings. That's when he noticed the masked men running up on him and the gleam of the pistols. FP pulled out his magnums and started gunning. He caught the one closest to him on the left side of his mask. The impact from the round knocked him off his feet as he let out a scream that would eventually be his last. FP took cover behind the caddy as his heart started beating wildly, feeling as though it could actually come through his chest. The tank was full now, but the gas kept going, overflowing onto the ground. FP knew that if a bullet struck the side of that car, the station would be up in flames in a matter of seconds. He got up, let out a few shots, and ran for the garbage dumpster at the end of the parking lot. While he was running, he could hear bullets zipping past his ears as gunmen tried to hit their mark. All around him, he could see sparks on the ground where the bullets struck and missed. On the inside of the station, the attendant was on the phone describing the chaotic scene that was unfolding right outside in this parking lot. FP was trapped behind a dumpster with nowhere to go. He peeked around the corner and was almost struck by a bullet as it just missed him striking the dumpster. His hands started to shake as he took a couple of breaths in hopes to calm himself. He knew that now was not the time to lose control and to keep the pursuers at bay. He peeked around the corner and let off a few shots. FP knew he only had 8 more bullets, and they all had to count or he'll be joining his brother and best friend. That alone brought a calmness over him. He took a couple deep breaths, letting it out slowly, watching it form a thin cloud in the winter air. He peeked around the corner of the dumpster and noticed one of the men looking down at his pistols, reloading. FP raised one of his cannons and took aim. He squeezed once, and the bullet caught his victim right in the top of his head and blew a hole the size of a golf ball in the top of his cranium. His victim took a few steps back, and his form fell hard to the ground as he blew the last breath of life from his body. The last shooter panicked when he noticed that he was now by himself, so he took off running. FP heard the man's footsteps running across the cold concrete. This caused him to get up from his temporary cover. He saw his gunman in retreat, so he let out a few shots and missed. The masked man turned around and let out 3 shots of his own and missed his intended target. All 3 shots hit the windshield of the caddy. The last gunman disappeared behind the gas station. FP went around and removed the nozzle. Simultaneously, the van came storming from behind the gas station. He had his pistol hanging out of the window, letting off rounds. FP dove behind the caddy to avoid the slugs the man was sending. He got up and jumped in his car and went after the van. He stomped down on the gas pedal and the car began quickly gaining on the work van. When the masked man noticed that he couldn't outrun the car, he began trying to run FP off the road. He swerved left and a hard right, slamming into the luxury car. That was to no avail because of the size and the weight of the L-Dog. The van tried to increase speed but hit a sheet of ice and spun out of control. FP hit the same sheet of ice, but he turned his wheel to follow the tail of the car. This enabled him to control the luxury sedan. When he saw the van losing control, he knew that this was his chance to capitalize. As his car slid across the ice, he stuck the .357 out the window and pulled the trigger twice. The second round shot out the back tire as the van started to fishtail wildly. The van struck a pole and then hit the driver's head of the steering wheel, knocking him unconscious. FP pulled up alongside of the van and got out with both pistols in his hand raised to his chest. He eased up alongside of the van and pointed one of his pistols in the direction of the driver's door. From where he was standing, he could see inside the van from the mirror on the door. There wasn't any movement inside, and to make sure, he ran up to the window and started blasting, emptying the remainder of his bullets into the masked victim. FP opened the door and sat the deceased victim straight up. Out of curiosity, he reached for the mask to pull it off. "Ah, shit," he responded, backing away from the driver's door. The person who he thought was a man was just a young man that couldn't have been any older than 16. Though this young man tried to take life away from FP, it still couldn't stop the lump forming in his throat as he wiped his running nose with the back of his hand. This young man tried to kill me, FP thought. But this child would never live life to turn himself around after seeing the errors of his ways. It's all because of me, FP thought as he slumped against the van. "What the fuck were you thinking about?" he yelled to his victim. "Shit!" butting his head with the pistol in his hand. A patrol car had just spotted the make and model of the vehicles that came over the radio. When he hit the sirens, FP spun around, jumped in his car, and sped off. He started up St. Clair doing about 80 with the police right behind him. He drove up the Ave, pushing the engine to his limits at times. FP got all the way up to 152nd and St. Clair with 4 more cruisers behind him. He tried to make a hard right and lost control of his car. The L-Dog started fishtailing wildly. When he finally gained control of it, he was heading directly for a telephone pole. When the wood and the vehicle met, the impact of the collision sent him through the windshield. The glass was the last thing FP remembered seeing. Chapter 2. "All right, you sorry motherfuckers, it's chow time," the correction officer yelled. This woke FP up out of sleep. It also startled him, and the FP knew it because he stood at FP's doorway with a shit-eating grin plastered on his face. Just once, FP wanted nothing more than to go toe-to-toe with the turnkey without the repercussions behind it. He knew it would never happen, but it didn't stop him from shooting daggers at him. The CO stood there a few seconds before moving along to ruin someone else's morning. FP got up, brushed his teeth, and splashed water on his face. He dried off and stood there looking in the scarred and scratched plastic that had to pass for a mirror. It had been a year ago today that the shootout and high-speed chase incident took place that landed him in prison on a life sentence. The prosecutor started with the death sentence and was pressing hard. The one and only person that could have saved him was the gas attendant, but for some reason he suddenly caught a case of amnesia. The 2 masked bodies and multiple shells from 4 different guns left at the gun scene was what kept the death sentence off the table. "FP, you should see the female guards they just hired," Brian excitedly stated as he came into FP's cell. Brian Anderson was FP's best friend. They stayed close ever since they came in from the county jail together. Brian was the smallest person in Mansfield Correction. He weighed 135 pounds soaking wet and stood 5'4". When he first came to prison, his frail frame and light skin made him an easy target for the men that preyed on the smaller guys for sex. The friendship with FP kept any potential rape from taking place. Brian was doing life for killing the women who shot up all the dope while they were getting high. He had no friends, and his family turned their back on him well before he became incarcerated. FP saw through all the bullshit that everyone else couldn't. He knew that if drugs hadn't been a factor in his life, Brian probably would have been somebody. What? The warden brought in some fresh meat for the incarcerated beast? FP asked as he hung his rag on the end of his rack. Yeah, but you really have to see these bras, man, Brian exclaimed. FP put on his state shirt and pants accompanied with his Chuck Taylor tennis shoes. Come on, man, let's go eat. On the way to the chow hall, men spoke to FP, showing him his well-earned respect. 6 months ago, everyone knew he was coming. The notorious Frederick Patterson was coming to the worst prison in Ohio, Mansfield Correctional Institution, eloquently dubbed by the inmates doing time there as Castle Grayskull. There was an inmate there by the name of Antoine Jackson, but everyone called him Bricks because of his muscular physique. He was locked up for a triple murder. Bricks had been down for 10 years and was feared by the majority of the prison. That even included the correction officers. He extorted, raped, and muscled his way on anything, and that even included respect. When FP first came to the castle, he knew somebody was going to try him, so he dropped 2 master locks and 3 socks and never left his cell without them. On his 15th day in the prison is when he would eventually bump heads with the inmate nicknamed Bricks. It was in the chow hall when Bricks first saw FP eating by himself. Bricks heard about the Seatown legend, so before he arrived, he thought in his sick, sadistic mind that if he beat up FP real bad, then later take his manhood by way of rape, that he would earn even more respect from his peers. Just thinking of this brought a sinister smile to his face. Say, man, that's my seat you sitting in, Bricks tested. FP looked up, picked up his tray, and moved to another table. The whole chow hall got quiet. Even the line server stopped making trays to watch the test as it unfolded. Bricks felt a sense of victory washed over him as he watched FP get up and go to another table. As FP walked past him, he noticed Bricks let him get too close to him to be trying the bullshit he was trying to pull. This time when FP took a seat, he put one hand in his pocket and put a firm grip around his socks. Bricks stood right across from FP and put both hands on the table and leaned in. Say, man, thought I told you that's my seat you sitting in. FP looked up at Bricks with a devious smile on his face. The first move was snatching his arms from under the table. He grabbed the back of his head and drove it down with force, smashing his nose and cheekbone on impact. As Bricks' head was coming back up from the bounce off the table, FP in one motion took out the socks and swung. The locks hit Bricks in the left side of his mouth. Blood and teeth went flying. FP got up on his seat and jumped down, swinging the locks again like a mad henchman about to behead his victim. He struck Bricks on the top of his head. A sickening crunch filled the chow hall. Blood instantly started pouring out the top of his head. FP slid the socks across the chow hall floor. He jumped on Bricks and started a relentless assault, finishing what Bricks started. The chow hall came alive as convicts urged FP to beat the man and terrorize him for the past 10 years. The correction officers came with nightsticks drawn and dragged FP away. Usually when an altercation occurred of that magnitude, the powers that be would usually move both prisoners to another institution. Bricks had terrorized so many inmates and officers that the warden kept him in the castle as a form of embarrassment. The fight was heard throughout the prison, and afterwards nobody gave Bricks his respect, yet FP earned it all. Aside of that, Bricks was never the same again. The locks that FP used caused permanent brain damage. The tables turned on the Mansfield bully. He was now the victim of extortion and rape, receiving the same treatment he inflicted on so many over the years. FP spent 3 months in the hole and was charged with assault. With a life sentence, he didn't care. For him, it was all about the respect. FP and Brian were sitting in the chow hall chit-chatting in between bites when the sergeant walked in with the new employees showing them around. There were about 10 correction officers. Out of that 10 were 3 females. One of them was a young lady by the name of Destiny Carmichael, who was 25. She stood at 5'6", carrying 145 pounds. She was a red bone with long, straight black hair that came past her shoulders. Her beauty was exceptional, putting you in the mind of a young Stacey Dash. That even included those mysterious green eyes. Destiny wanted some excitement in her life and thought about being a correction officer that would fill the void that she'd been missing. Besides, the pay was good and it came with outstanding benefits. But just the thought of having authority over murderers, robbers, rapists, arsonists, drug dealers, and other criminals was a complete turn on to her. The sergeant and the new employee stopped at a table next to the one Brian and FP were eating at. While the sergeant was talking about what he called a wonderful facility, all the new CEOs were watching him except for Destiny. She was looking at FP, but couldn't place his face until it hit her. "Oh shit," she said under her breath. Destiny was looking at the man she heard so much about and couldn't believe she would be working in the same prison that housed Cleveland's drug kingpin Frederick Patterson. She heard the stories about all of his houses and cars, how all the old-timers thought he had a heart of gold but chose the wrong profession, about the deaths of his brother and best friend, about how he was both respected and feared, how he built basketball courts in the neighborhood for high school's teams. Every year he would buy them new uniforms and Chuck Taylor tennis shoes. Every Thanksgiving he would pass out turkeys. Also, he would give toys to the kids to the less fortunate families. Little did they know his conscience was eating him alive for pushing all that poison in his communities. He used his act of kindness not only to give back, but also balance the good from the bad in his life at that time. Brian was nudging FP under the table while FP had his head down looking at his plate. When he looked up, he noticed Destiny checking him out. She was smiling, then turned and walked away with her co-workers. "Damn, FP, what was all that about?" Brian asked. "I don't know, man. Maybe she know me from the streets." Brian put a fork full of food in his mouth. "I don't know, man. It looked like she was eye-fucking you." "Come on, Brian. Ain't your mama teach you not to talk with your mouth full of food?" FP asked with a twisted face. "My bad," he said, then swallowed. "But it still looked like she was fucking you with your eyes. I know guys who've been here for years that didn't land some panties till after 5 years in. Here it is, you might be getting some real soon. Hell, I'm still trying to get lucky." "Whatever, man," FP responded, starting to get annoyed with his friend. "Let's just get through eating. I want to work out."
Okay, guys, man, I really hope you guys enjoyed the piece I put together for y'all. You know what I'm saying? I got more content on the way. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know to be notified when Black Cartel drop that content. You feel me? And as always, man, I love y'all, man.
Football is black, basically we handle our business. L for limo tent, so let Dave Cleve be my witness. A for arithmetic, whereas it keeps the eyes gazing. Total my addition, multiplication, subtraction, and equations. C is for Capone, cause without me there's no home. Foundation, a place for the Black Cartel camp to roam. K is for killers clapping dome, while I'm sipping cognac, while I'm looking